Welcome. My name is Kiki Levy, and I am the Administrative Specialist at Temple Small Business Development Center. The Temple SBDC helps small businesses start and grow. We provide free one-on-one counseling services and a variety of low to no cost webinars. You have joined us today for our Customer Relationship Management CRM Basics webinar. A copy of today's PowerPoint, along with other materials, will be sent out to all attendees in 3 to 5 business days after the event. All attendees have been muted. We encourage you to post any questions you have in the Q&A. Please do not post questions in the chat. Now, I will turn the floor over to Derek Gibbs. Welcome, Derek.
Thank you, Kiki. Really appreciate the introduction. I'll just kind of pull some of the materials that we'll want to walk through today. I think, as you mentioned, it'll be distributed to all the attendees probably within a few days, but you don't have to worry about getting your hands on it. We'll make sure it gets sent out to everyone. So while some people are kind of getting into the lobby here, let me just pull up the presentation, and then we can go ahead and get started. So just give me 1 second. Can you see my screen?
Yes, you are good.
Awesome. So today we're going to be talking about, a CRM or customer relationship management system. Some of you may be pretty familiar with this concept. Some of you, may be pretty new to this entire topic. So I've tried to kind of provide enough of an overview to introduce the concept to you for those of you who are not familiar, but also, maybe bring up some tips and advice for those of you who are already familiar with the concepts and are looking to kind of expand your capability in this area, and also, any skills or kind of tips and tricks that I might be able to offer you, as well as, where you might be able to get your hands on, some free software and some free tools that can help you in your small business. So let me just make sure I pull up the Q&A. So as Kiki mentioned, what I typically like to do is allow everyone to kind of post some questions within the Q&A as we're going along through the presentation. I'll try and keep an eye on it. And if there's questions that come up that I can kind of pretty easily, sneak into the presentation and address it right then, I'd love to do that. So it's a little bit more in context. Otherwise, you might save some questions to, for the end, so we can have like a bit of a broader discussion on some of those things. So with that, why don't we go ahead and kind of click in. I'll give you a preview of what the agenda is for today. So we have a lot to cover. I'll try and keep it as engaging and as interesting as possible, but there are a lot of things to cover within CRM. So, obviously, after I give kind of a little bit more background on myself, what I want to do is talk about, what are the kind of basics of customer management in general, so independent of a particular process or particular solution or tool that you might use. The importance of customer experience, or the growing importance of the customer experience, and how that can be a differentiator for your business going forward, especially in 2021, especially when everything is primarily online or over the phone or over email, but also in person too, how you can drive elements of customer experience if you have a more traditional business where people are coming in. And then kind of taking the lens of a small business owner, where should you actually focus your energy and effort and attention? Because I know you have limited time, limited energy, limited resources, and it can be difficult to prioritize where you want to spend those resources that you have in order to really kind of grow your business or push things forward. So so that'll kind of be the context and the upfront section, and then we'll get into kind of the building blocks of customer relationship management or CRM. And so I won't kind of go through each block right now, but we'll get into what are the building blocks, how should you think about it, and then how can you kind of stack them on top of each other in order to build a capability in this area. And then the last thing that we'll talk about is assessing kind of where you are in terms of your level of maturity and your needs around, a customer relationship management solution, and then potentially picking the right one that's going to fit your needs. As I mentioned at the beginning, there's a bunch that are out there today that are free for 1 to 2 users or small teams of people, and that might be kind of all you need for your particular business, or you may be a little bit more well established and you might need something a bit more robust or have additional features and functionalities, or you may be already using one and you want to potentially upgrade from a free one to a paid service. So we'll get into that as well. So I guess before I move on, let me just double check that I can get access to the Q&A tab, which doesn't seem to be showing up. So let me, Kiki, we haven't gotten anything in the Q&A yet, right?
No, there's no questions yet in the Q&A. At the bottom of the screen, you should just see like 2 message boxes. And it says Q&A at the bottom. If you click that, like if there were questions, they would, I guess, filter in under the open section.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, I'll try and keep an eye on it. And as we go along, as questions pop up, I'll try and answer it. If for whatever reason they're not showing up for me, then Kiki, maybe you can just let me know as questions come in, and I can try and address it. But I'll just try and keep an eye on the Zoom Q&A, and we'll do it that way.
Got you covered.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So let me give you a little bit of background for myself first. So I'm a technology and management consultant at a pretty large consulting firm. Some of you may be familiar with it, PricewaterhouseCoopers or PwC. And so I actually work within our marketing, sales, and service transformation practice, where we actually help companies and large enterprises, kind of big and small, really just better connect with their customers, right? How can we think about transforming the way that they use technology in order to drive their sales and marketing processes? So I've done a lot of work for different types of companies, consumer companies, CPG, financial services, industrial products, et cetera. And also fortunate enough that my work has taken me maybe not all around the globe, but at least to different parts of North and South America. So I kind of threw up a picture of some of my time I was spent on a project traveling down to Mexico City, which was a really great experience. I'm even repping my PwC shirt in the photo. But it's a really great place to work, and enjoyed my time there. But what I've noticed is that a lot of the same problems that my clients at these incredibly large Fortune 500 companies are facing, although the complexity and scale is a little bit different, it kind of boils down to some fundamental problems, and those problems are applicable to incredibly large businesses and to small businesses alike. And a lot of what I do day to day is utilizing customer relationship management solutions, like something like Salesforce or Zendesk, right? In order to address those problems. How can we actually get information about the customer so that we can tailor the way that we interact with them and the way that they experience our business or our services, that's going to create value for them, right? So I do that kind of as my day job, probably more than even just a day job. But I also like volunteering. I like doing stuff like this. I've been working with the Small Business Development Center at Temple for a little over a year and a half now. And then I also provide like pro bono consulting services for small businesses through a couple of different organizations, Small Business Strong being one of them, which is based out of Massachusetts, and then through a couple of different nonprofits as well. So it's something that I'm really passionate about. I grew up as the child of 2 entrepreneurs. So both my parents owned their own businesses. So I know the ups and downs and kind of variability that and a life of entrepreneurship and small businesses can take you. So I'm empathetic to that, and I think there's a lot that kind of the work that I do on a day-to-day basis can kind of provide value to small businesses. So and then I can't forget to mention that I actually am an alum of Temple University. So I went to Temple University, and specifically the Fox School of Business a few years ago. Really glad of the time that I spent at Temple, and they've set me up for success in my personal and professional career. So, but that's enough about me. So what I'd love to do next is start to get into a little bit of the background and customer basics around, how should you even be thinking about the way that you interact with your customers. And apologize if this is, in some cases is pretty basic, but I think it's good to set a foundation. So, obviously customers are kind of the fundamental component of a business. Whether you're Walmart or PepsiCo or one of these massive companies, global companies, or you're a small business, or you own a hair salon, or you own a laundromat, or you provide some type of professional service at a very small scale. Obviously, your business is contingent on having customers, right? And I think sometimes it's so fundamental that it's easy to forget the basics, right? There's so many things that you kind of get wrapped up in order, like, how can I grow my business? How can I do all these different things, that we kind of lose track of some of the basics around, customers. So what I wanted to kind of re-baseline in is that I kind of think of the overall customer approach as having, let's say, 4 pillars, starting with your customer strategy. And this is really understanding, who your current, customer base is, and or if, let's say, you're just starting a business, who is your target, demographic and target audience for customers. And this, comes into play a lot if you're kind of in early stages and you're identifying what your business plan is, what your target demographics and target segments are going to be. But it's equally as important if you've already established yourself as a business than if you're getting started, right? Identifying, where you want to target your best customers, and where you're going to want to spend your time and effort. So you can get that through a lot of different ways, market research and insight, or just generating some like customer information that's available online and doing some kind of like general leads generation and stuff like that. But I want to emphasize the point that it's really critical to understand, what your target demographic and target customer is, because as tempting as it is to say, well, I want everyone to be my customer, and even if that's true, you're going to have to make some decisions about how you're going to invest your time, your limited time, energy, and resources to actually, acquire and service those customers and build a customer base, right? So I would challenge everyone, if you haven't thought about what your customer strategy is, to think about it in terms of, what are my targets and who do I want to go after? The second pillar is, once you've identified what your kind of target customer group is, how do you actually put a strategy in place, or how do you actually action going out and acquiring those customers, right? So that can be done through different marketing activities, whether it's a newsletter, whether it's a mailer, whether it's cold calls, whether it's just kind of word of mouth generation of customer acquisition. And so there's a lot of activities I'm sure you're in the thick of in order to generate new customers or acquire leads. And so it's important to have a pretty well-defined process for how you're going to do that. Again, because you have limited, energy, time, resources, right? And this is where, if you are just shifting from, customer strategy of, I want everyone to be my customer to now customer acquisition, you'll very quickly realize it's not really feasible to, send out, mailers to every single person in a neighborhood or every single person in a city. You'll need to kind of pick and choose who you're going after, right? So that's the second pillar. The third pillar of kind of like an overall customer experience is actually, how do you provide the service or provide the, the product to that customer in a way that, generates a great experience for them, right? So there's, if you're just a product company, it's pretty straightforward. It's relatively low touch, right? But you can still kind of inform that experience in the way that your product is produced. If you are a service, that that service and that experience kind of is the whole product, right? The way that it feels to interact with you, and especially if you're providing, let's say, consulting services, but also whether it's some other type of professional service, or something where you have a skill that you're providing for a fee to customers. I'll challenge you, and we'll kind of expand on this a bit more, to think about the kind of end-to-end customer experience of your product or service, as a way that obviously drives growth and drives sales for your company, but also can act as potentially the strongest acquisition strategy and the strongest marketing strategy. can be having a great customer experience and generating a lot of word of mouth just through your customer base. And that kind of brings me to the last point about retention. There's a number of things that you can do in order to retain your customers or make them repeat customers. Again, for certain services, they're kind of very naturally can become repeat customers if what you provide, let's say it's haircuts, right? They might plan to get one on a 2, 3, or 4 week basis. And so having a customer retention strategy is going to be important as well. And so what I will say is that these are kind of the fundamental building blocks of how you should plan to engage with your customers. And a CRM platform is something that can be very valuable for managing this entire process. And so we'll get into that in a little bit. So I see some questions coming in, but I actually cannot see the specific questions. So actually, if you give me a second, I'm just going to reshare my screen. Hopefully that I can, so I can pull up the.
I can read them off for you, Derek.
Sure. So while I'm resharing, why don't you go ahead and read them off? That'd be helpful, Kiki. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Adam, he would like to know, do you like Zoho? What are the best CRMs available for a small to medium-sized business? B2C first, then B2B. So that's the first question. And then the second question, this has hemmed me up for quite some time. I am in the healthcare field, public administration, and global health, and believe that all groups would be my target area. How can I shorten this down since the healthcare field is extremely huge?
Yeah, those are both really great questions. Adam, I'll answer your question at the end. I kind of have a section that's dedicated to that. And for the Cecilia Global Group, yeah, trying to figure out exactly what your customer strategy is. It's definitely challenging, right? And I think part of that is going to come down to where do you really see like your value proposition as a as a provider of a service, and trying to best match what you can offer and where you have differentiated capabilities against where there's actual needs in the market, right? It's kind of, you can think about it as this idea of like comparative advantage, right? It's not that people would be a bad fit to be a customer for your service, but you really want to be kind of focusing on acquiring the customers that you can kind of provide value to in a differentiated way. And so I know that's a pretty, that's sufficiently high level and vague. And I think, Kiki, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think some of the work that the SBDC provides can kind of help answer some of those questions. Is that right?
That's correct. We can definitely get you connected with a consultant. If you would like to send us an email, I'll get that in the chat for you. We can get you connected with someone who can kind of walk you through just a more in-depth process. Yeah,
that's excellent. Okay, so why don't we see, what does that look like in action? So when I, was going to school at Temple, I went to Ed's barbershop. It was just on Girard. And so I'd love to take it as kind of like a mini case study for, thinking about this business in the context of, of those 4 pillars that I talked about. So if we think about, customer strategy, what are the customer demographics that are in the area that I probably want to focus on, right? And so if I apply it specifically to Ed's, given the proximity, given that it's in a city, if you think about, and given that it's a barbershop, if you think about the demographics that they were kind of really targeting, it was primarily, college students, young professionals, obviously kind of, the vast majority would be, males, because they kind of focus on more like buzz cuts and stuff like that versus more like salon type of thing. So they kind of targeted what their offering was in order to fit a smaller segment. So they didn't say, we're going to try and give haircuts to every single person in the neighborhood. Instead, they focused on a few key areas. And then, so understanding that that's kind of what they're going for, translating that to customer acquisition, how do they, how might they approach that? Well, I remember there's like a local coffee shop that was nearby, and they had, posters in the coffee shop and cards in the coffee shop, which kind of fits with the college student, young professional, kind of, even potentially male, demographic, right? So they were highly likely to get leads and acquire customers that fit with the target customer group that they were trying to address, right? So that was a particularly high value area or activity that they spent, high value, low cost, right? And kind of very fits neatly with their customer strategy. And then kind of getting into, the reason that I went there and went back for basically the entire 4 years was the experience of the product and service that they provided. It was a very high quality experience, very personable. The way that they obviously conducted the haircuts I enjoy, but also all of the experience around it, right? The fact that there's a sense of camaraderie and comfort being in there, that they're kind of your friend and they remember you from 2 weeks ago and they asked you how your vacation was, right? That entire experience kind of builds a positive all of those activities build a positive experience for a customer, like myself, that then makes it really easy for me to kind of become a repeat customer, right? And be retained. And so in this case, they didn't necessarily do like a loyalty program, but their customer experience was good enough that I felt like coming back every two or 3 weeks for about 4 years. So this is it's kind of just a rough example of how you can take these 4 pillars and kind of start to filter down what types of activities you want to go engage and do in order to meet those. So this will bring me to the next point about what I'll challenge you to think about. So beyond these 4 pillars is how can you understand your broader customer experience, right? And customer experience, it's kind of a trendy term right now. But for those of you who aren't as familiar with it, I can give like a rough definition. The customer experience is really, how does that person feel, when they are engaging with your company in general, and then also how do they feel and what's their experience in the way that they either receive the product or service that you're offering, right? So in the cases of if you're providing a service, it's pretty obvious, everything from the way that they are acquired or the way that they interact with you on the phone to how it feels to schedule an appointment, to come in, to actually provide the service, how you follow up with them after the fact. All of that comprises, what the customer experience is. And there's a lot of, I guess, research or kind of findings lately that show customer experience is an increasingly important part of kind of being successful, both whether you're a large business or a small business, right? So I put kind of some pretty interesting statistics that point to that there's a real business value to focusing on customer experience. And I think it's great because it's a little bit of an aligned incentive, right? As a company, you want to provide the best service and experience possible to your customers, and obviously they are going to be, the recipients of that. But there's a kind of a payback to you as well, in the sense that customers who have rated experiences very highly, are going to purchase more from those companies. They're going to spend more at those companies, and they're going to talk about that experience to their friends and family, which is going to drive a lot of natural kind of word of mouth and customer acquisition, right? And I'll challenge, like even more so than the upside of a positive customer experience, the downsides in today's world of a negative customer experience are particularly brutal, right? So out of a population of customers, if 10 folks have, or let's say 5 folks have had, have purchased something or been to a particular company and they had a negative customer experience for whatever reason, right? They, only one of them would continue thinking about going back or purchasing more from that company. And 4 of them would say, I'm not going to engage with this company again. I had such a bad experience from a single experience that I don't want to engage with them again. And so that, decreases your ability to acquire customers and retain customers, a lot. Like an 80% reduction in terms of your customer base is pretty painful, right? So this is just to speak to, customer experience overall is incredibly important. And one of the ways that, I specialize in improving this customer experience is applying technology to say, like, can we build some structure and some process and potentially even automate a lot of the activities and the ways that you're going to engage with a customer in order to improve this end-to-end experience, right? I think a lot of companies, whether you're large or small businesses, tend to focus, very heavily on the particular product or service, right? So whenever they come in for their appointment, or whenever, you're actually looking at the particular, product, on a shelf somewhere, But equally as important are all the experiences that happen before that and all the experiences that happen after that that will drive kind of this overall customer experience. So with that, with that in mind, where do you actually invest your time and energy as a small business, right? As I mentioned, you have limited resources, so you're going to have to make some tough decisions. And I've kind of boiled this down and oversimplified it into, where it's worth it to invest your time and where it might not be worth it to invest your time. So where it's definitely worth it to invest your time is, anything that involves figuring out, who are my customers today, right? What are the common traits and characteristics for those that actually, purchased from me? For those of you, where my target customers are and how I want to acquire them, right? What is the right way that I want to approach it? Is it something that's done completely digitally? Do I purchase ads on Facebook or Instagram? Is it something that needs to be a little bit more high touch or in person? And then how am I going to actually provide a positive customer experience, right? All of those things, I think I'll be pretty confidently say that you're not going to overinvest in any of those areas, right? As long as you're addressing those questions, you're going to be, finding a return from that in terms of growth in your business, in terms of retention. So you can pretty safely say if you're going to be tackling those questions, that's going to be a positive return for you. Where I think people get stuck is that there's a lot of things that are out there that are really cool, really flashy, have a lot of promises about, particular cool technology that it's going to be able to, acquire you so many new customers, right? Or solve all of your problems. And I would say the vast majority of the time, this is all just kind of window dressing, right? Most of those things that are really flashy and promises to solve all your problems really won't add any value to your business, unless of course they're kind of fundamentally addressing those main questions, right? But the vast majority of time, it's something that's a little bit kind of extra and frivolous, and maybe down the line when you get really comfortable with this, a lot of this and have a strong foundation, you can start to invest in some of those areas. But without addressing all of this stuff on the left, I don't think you'll want to do anything on the right. It's going to be overly flashy. So let me just take a pause there and look through the any questions that have popped up. We can just take a natural point. So if any of you have questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A. I'll just try and look through. So let's see. So Adam, we mentioned we'll get to you. This anonymous attendee. Again, I think Kiki might be able to. I think she'll be providing a link in terms of how to reach out to the Small Business Development Center so that you can potentially connect with the consultant, and they might be able to help you figure out how you want to reach your target audience. And then the last question, CRM recommendations. Oh yeah, I'll tackle that at the end as well. So okay, if there's no other questions, then we'll kind of continue on. So so this is where I think it's important to get to the basics of customer relationship management. There's kind of three fundamental building blocks. And so I'm going to start with block one, and kind of it will represent the foundation of, how you need to approach this. And then you can build on top of that block, with these other ones to get additional value. But the way that I've structured this, there is value in addressing, if all you ever do is kind of address block one, that's going to be super valuable, right? And then obviously if you address block one and you kind of have a need or desire to kind of continue to build on top of that and address block two, that's going to add value, and so on. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So in the way that I'm going to deconstruct, customer relationship management is really think about these three blocks kind of in the term that itself, right? I think you hear CRM or customer relationship management a lot, but we're going to unpack, what does that mean? And how do the words that are in the term actually correspond to things that you actually might want to do? So we're kind of breaking down the same blocks into, first addressing the customer, then we're going to address, what does it mean to address the relationship? And then third, what does it mean to kind of manage all of the above, right? So starting with the first thing. So in terms of customer relationship management, focusing on the customer. So this again is like kind of the fundamental building block of any CRM process or solution. And it's getting control and understanding who your customers are, right? So it's collecting information about them, whether they're actual current customers or customers that you'd like to acquire. So having some type of lead generation process where you can capture this information. And it's addressing some of these key questions, right? Who's purchased from me before, right? What did they purchase from me when they purchased? Who would I like to purchase from me in the future? That kind of gets back to the customer strategy and customer acquisition. And how would I reach them, right? Do I have contact information for these people? Do I have a phone number? Do I have an email? Do I have information about their preferred method of contacting, right? Because I think we all know the experience of, companies providing maybe like unsolicited, emails or text messages, and it actually can have a negative effect on your perception of that company, right? So addressing these key points, and so there are a few there's a few kind of practical tips that you can use to automate a lot of this process. One, if you don't already have some type of point of sale system that can do a lot of the legwork for you for customer purchasing. A lot of it is kind of purely based off of a fee of your transaction, so you shouldn't have to pay a lot in order to do it. And that's especially if you have more of like a retail style business or something that has a lot of in-person transactions, some type of going to be helpful. Because they have a lot of things that are built in so that you can track their customer information, even like loyalty programs and stuff, which we'll get into. If not, you can use, something as simple as Excel to track customer information. And actually there's a template I think I'll make sure Kiki has that I can provide to you that represents kind of the very basic foundation of, collecting customer information, contact information, etc., so that you have it in a consistent and clean place that you can use for things in the future, right? The third thing is you'll want to make sure that you kind of maintain this data on a regular basis, right? Again, it's much simpler if you have a quote unquote CRM solution, it'll do that automatically. If you have a point of sale solution, it'll do that automatically. But just making sure that you maintain this data so that if you ever kind of reach back out to them as repeat customers, or you have a promotion that you want to offer, you have a way of getting in contact. And of course, the more that you know about your customers, the better, but there's a fine balance of there's value to knowing more about them, but there's also a cost of asking that information, right? I think we've been in situations where, you're kind of wondering why a company needs to know my birthday, right? Or why it needs to know whether I'm a male or female or non-binary, or why, why they need to know basically anything about me other than the fact that I'm interested in purchasing their product or service, right? So, but so there's a little bit of a balancing act there. But the more that you can understand about your customers, the better you can kind of target the way you're going to engage with them and interact with them to kind of generate the best experience. So that's the first building block. Let me just double check if there's any questions. I don't think so. The second building block, right? This is kind of coming around. So if we have a handle on customer, how do we think about the relationship component of customer relationship management? So this is, building on top of the first, as I mentioned, and it's understanding, what is the relationship that you have with that customer, and kind of getting a horizontal view of, how they've interacted with you, right? So who has engaged with you before, right? So maybe they've never purchased with you, but they clicked on your website, or they opened up an email, or they sent you an email saying, hey, I'm interested in this, I would like to learn more, right? How can you track who has shown interest, and sort of where are they along this overall process of, of engaging with your company, right? Have you reached out to someone before and they said, maybe they're not interested, right? If that's only happened once, maybe there's an opportunity for you to kind of follow up with them, right? And say, hey, maybe, it's been a few months. I'm just curious if you had a chance to consider if there's any value that we can provide to you. That's definitely an opportunity. If you've already done it 5 times, actually, you kind of run the risk of having that negative customer experience side where you've asked them the same questions 5 times because you haven't really kept track of who you've interacted with. And then almost equally as important is, have they reached out to you, and have you actually provided a follow-up, right? So if they sent you an email and it's been sitting in your inbox, and that you haven't gotten back to them for 14 days, that's a particular, that's a big risk to your business, right? Or maybe just kind of losing track of texts or emails, or the ways that they sent you a direct message on Instagram to your company profile page. Making sure that you have a history of when you've followed up with them, and as important as whether or not it's happened, what was the nature of the conversation, or what was the nature of that interaction, right? So keeping track of, first the customers, who are all the people that I, have interacted with or want to interact with. And so you can think of that as almost, one dimension of this. And then in the second dimension, you want to say, what is the time frame and horizon, horizontal view of all the ways that I've interacted with them. So did I initiate contact, or did they initiate contact? What is the history of that relationship back and forth? Where have they expressed, they were interested in something, but they were still uncertain about it, right? So organizing kind of this information so that you can easily understand and set the context when I'm talking to, Sue, who happens to be a prospective customer, all the times that we've talked before, all the times that I've reached out, and then organizing that in a way that makes it actionable for you to use. And so obviously a CRM is kind of built to do that. It's built to keep track of, your calls and your emails and your notes and the overall relationship, right? So that's kind of the middle part of the middle part of it. So the customer stuff you can pretty easily track just on your own, right? Just in an Excel sheet or some, in some type of database. In the case of a relationship, it becomes a lot more complicated to kind of manually keep track of that in an Excel sheet, although you can for sure. And this is where you'll probably kind of realize more value from having something like a Zoho or Salesforce or Zendesk in order to keep track and automatically associate all of these interactions, whether it's purchases, calls, texts, etc. So that's kind of the second component of CRM or customer relationship management. Just getting visibility into the horizontal view of your relationship. The third component, which is kind of the management portion, right? So is if you have a handle on your customers, you have a handle on the relationship that you guys have had, all the interactions. The third is like, how do you actually manage that in a proactive way? Either which customers you engage with, or how you engage with them throughout your relationship. And this is where, you'll start to realize a lot, even more value if you're able to kind of build the foundation of the first two, because what it allows you to do is start to map out what is my ideal customer journey, what is my ideal kind of sales funnel or process that I would like customers to go through. And you are able to exert some control over kind of this very important customer experience, right? Up until that point, everything might just kind of, you just manage to the, what's kind of at the top of your inbox, or the most recent text message, or, whoever is the loudest is going to get the most attention, right? In this case, you can think a little bit proactively about what do you want the customer experience to be, and then what are the steps in that process in order for that to be the case. And you can do it, manually. You might have an informal process, right? So, when you reach out to someone and they're interested, you have 2 follow-up calls before you actually kind of provide a pitch and kind of sell them on your services, right? Maybe that's the extent of your process. Or maybe you have something that's a little bit more rigorous that you can build into a tool that says, if they reach out to you, you provide XYZ information. Whenever they provide a follow-up, this is the person that it's going to be, sent to. And this is where it gets, more complicated if you have teams of people that are working under you or working with you for who is going to be responsible for what components of the experience, right? Having a process to engage with your customers, having a process of maintaining kind of the pipeline or funnel for your customer acquisition, so that you're not kind of going in fits and starts between, incredibly busy to completely dry, you don't have anyone that's kind of in the pipeline. Right? Being able to smooth that out is important. And then how do I actually scale? If you're kind of moving from a 1-person operation to potentially multiple people, it's easy for you to know that, if I'm engaging with someone, I'm going to treat them a certain way, or I'm going to do things a certain way. But once you have to manage a team of people, it's hard to maintain, consistency or even potentially quality across, that entire group, right? And so you want to be able to scale some processes across your team so that no matter who the customer goes to, they're going to have a consistent experience, right? And that kind of speaks to this broader importance of customer experience. So in terms of practical tips, like mapping out what the customer journey might look like, or what it is today, right? What if you had to be brutally honest about how it works, and then also how would you like it to work, right? If you had complete control over what an ideal experience would look like for a customer coming in, this is what it would look like, and maybe what's the reality somewhere in the middle between what it currently is and what the ideal version is. And then based on that, you can actually develop a sales process that you can build into a tool like a Zendesk or Salesforce, which will say, here are the steps that you should take. Here's the processes and guidelines that you should, and information that you should share at each stage, either in the acquisition funnel or in the sales funnel, or even in the retention and servicing funnel, right? You might want to have a servicing process for how often do you reach out to a customer after they've already purchased, right? Do you do it, a few days after, and then, maybe 2 weeks later, and then maybe 2 months after that, right? Just to make sure that you stay engaged with them. And you'll want to codify that into kind of business processes and business roles. Either that's, quote unquote, informally, just as like it's an expectation for you and also the people on your team, either formally in an actual kind of just documented process, maybe in like a PowerPoint or a Word document that just says step-by-step exactly what it is, or you can build it directly into an actual process or flow within a CRM. And then the final block is going to be kind of building everything on top of that, right? Which is, once you have a handle on your customers, right, which you can think of kind of the first dimension, and you have a handle on, the relationship and interactions that you have with them, is the second dimension, and then finally on top of that is, your process for how you manage both of those things. Maybe that's the third dimension. Now we're in 4D, we're in automation and enablement, all this really cool stuff that you can apply on top of that. But it only is really helpful and applicable if you have this foundation of these 3 blocks in place, right? So there's a lot that you can do with automation and enablement, stuff like chatbots, right? Stuff like automated servicing, stuff like, automated email campaigns and everything, templates in order to like solve, similar problems across your organization or your business. These are all fantastic things that you can use. But the real value of them only comes if you already have established a foundation. So I'm not going to spend too much time going into these items. Just know that they're available and you can kind of refer back to them, in the, once we send out the deck. But, any ways to kind of automate email responses or intake forms or, kind of more interesting ways of marketing to folks. And then even generating like analytics and reports on how successful, what's my conversion rate, et cetera. Really cool stuff. It's a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis with like these really big companies. But I think, it's not as necessary for small companies until they have a strong foundation. And so kind of speaking of that, you might want to self-assess where where you're at in terms of maturity, right? And so you might be somewhere along this kind of like 5-step process. I'm hoping not too many of you are, well, not hoping, but I apologize if, there are some of you that are already in this kind of 4 and 5 level of maturity where you have like very accurate customer data, well-defined processes, and it's optimized and automated. This time probably wasn't super valuable to you, so I apologize for that. But what I see most of the time is that small businesses are somewhere in between 1 and 3, potentially non-existent. I'm just kind of like, I'm a business that exists and I sell to people, but I don't really keep track of, who they are and, and what their information is, to something kind of ad hoc. Maybe you just manage everything via email, right? So you have their email and their contact info and stuff, but it's nothing more well-defined than that. Or maybe you already use a CRM where you have customer data, you have lead sources and some processes that you're working on, but it's not super well-defined. So most businesses are somewhere in there. And as part of that, your needs for a particular CRM, if you don't already have one, probably vary, right? From 1 to 3. If you're at 1, you can get away with just having something that's obviously completely free, like something in Excel. Even at 2, you can get by with that. At 3, you're going to want to start, using some actual CRM solution, and kind of building in some of the functionality that they have. So that kind of that brings us to the full spectrum of building blocks that you want to kind of keep in mind as you're progressing, and then also where you might be in terms of maturity. And then I'm sure a question that a lot of people are interested in figuring out as well. What types of tools can I use for something like this, something like a CRM. So before I move on, let me just double check that I'll try and answer any questions that might come up. So let's see. This question is posed. So the Cecilia Global Group, I'm not 100% sure I'm tracking tracking your question. Maybe that's something we can just quickly stay after and you can explain a little bit more, but I probably won't address it right now. Lisa asked, can you define conversion rate a little further and what an ideal ratio would be for growth? Yeah, so I can expand on this just a little bit and then we'll kind of move on. So, you're going to have to, so if you think about customer acquisition, right, you're going to want to build a funnel and a pipeline, right? And there's a cost associated to building that pipeline because that's where you spend your marketing. That's where you spend, your energy and effort engaging with folks that aren't already your customers, right? Ideally, you're going to want, in a perfect world, you'll have 100% conversion rate. All the effort that you spend, upfront building your pipeline and your funnel, eventually translate into customers. The challenge you might have in that case, which, is definitely not true for everyone, it's true for some folks, is that you might, be growing in terms of customers beyond what you can handle in terms of capacity, right? So really what you'll want to do is kind of figure out what's the balance point for you particularly in your business, where, you want to make sure that you have a consistent flow of customers kind of built from this pipeline that's going to allow you to kind of continue to grow your business at a reasonable pace. But you also want to invest enough time and effort and resources into your customer acquisition and your funnel so that you're not kind of running dry, right? And that's inherent in certain businesses, like it's just inherently seasonal and maybe that's the case. But in general, you'll want to kind of invest as much effort as you can growing your pipeline up to the point that you're kind of like at capacity and do it. And if you're doing something that's in a purely digital business, your conversion ratio, one, it's much cheaper to reach out to people because you can send an email or post like an online ad, but your conversion is also going to be much smaller, right? Versus if you're going door to door and handing out, pamphlets and talking to people directly, your overall scope that you can reach is going to be much, much smaller. It's going to be in the tens or, hundreds if you're really pushing it versus in the thousands or 10,000s, but your conversion rate might be much higher. So I can't really answer the question, specific to your business. Just know that it's a little bit of a balancing act between what you're capable of delivering as a company and as a business, and then how much, discretionary resources you can invest into marketing and some of that customer acquisition components. So hopefully that's helpful. And and since we're coming up a little bit on time, I just want to make sure I have a chance to flash this up to everyone. So I took, I've kind of organized some of the pretty popular CRMs that are out there and just did a kind of quick matrix for, what am I handle in terms of functionality, whether it's free or paid, what it's missing relative to others, but mainly just to say there are a ton of CRM platforms that are out there that are free, especially up to a certain number of users, right? And for the most part, they're fully functioning CRMs. The ones you probably have heard of before, like Salesforce, because it's very well known in corporate environments. I work with Salesforce a lot. I will say that I actually don't think it's a great fit for the vast majority of small businesses. And the reason is because it's pretty expensive, even though it's very powerful. But actually, you're kind of paying for a lot of functionality that you probably won't be able to use. I have like teams of developers that go in and like kind of customize exactly how they want their Salesforce environment to work. And in general, you're just not going to need something like that versus something like a Zoho or like a HubSpot, right? And again, most of these are complete full function, functional CRMs. If you're really just beginning and you don't want to have to deal with some of that complexity, or if you're just addressing like block 1 or block 2, you can maybe even use something like Google Sheets. Although I would recommend something like Google Sheets over Excel, just because it's it lives online and you can share it with other people, and you're not going to be limited by like, hey, I can't get into my laptop, I don't have access to any of my customer information, right? So something like that might be helpful. But again, there's so many things that are out there, and you can kind of look up any of the ones that are on here, and they're all going to be kind of similar, from Bitrix 24 to HubSpot. Like all of these kind of fit into this free CRMs that are for the most part full functionality. In general, are probably going to provide more functionality than you actually need. And I think we'll be able to address, basically all of this stuff that we talked about in blocks 1, 2, and 3 today. Maybe like the bonus block, like the automations and stuff, you might not be able to get into that. So if you're pretty mature, like maybe you need to look into something that's a bit more advanced. But for the vast majority of people, these are the things that that are going to be useful. So I'll leave this up. I mean, the page just after this is just, any questions that you might have, but I think it's kind of obvious that, like, you're welcome to ask questions. So I'll leave this up so you can look at it, and we'll just see, the questions that are coming in. Kiki, just a reminder, how are we doing on time? I just want to be cognizant of everyone's availability.
We have about 9 minutes left in the webinar. If you had a little additional time to spare, I'm willing to stay on and address the questions that come through the Q&A, but we have about 9 minutes left for the webinar.
Excellent. Okay, it's I didn't scroll down, so there's a few other things. Which of these platforms can you build automations for your sales pipeline that don't require coding? So Spencer, your question is about, like, building automations that doesn't require coding. I will say more and more, the majority of these CRMs are going to have some automations that don't require coding. I mean, even Salesforce, who, when they originally built the platform, it was kind of like, there was a set of functionality, and then there was like its own coding language that you can use to customize it. What they've been trying to do is, do stuff so that it's quote unquote out of the box, that you can build some automations, like, once a customer has been, vacant, like you haven't gotten a response from that customer for 3 days, it will automatically trigger an alert to, a salesperson to reach back out to them, right? I would say, definitely, Zoho and HubSpot and Salesforce, in general, like, you can build automations like that without code for the most part. You might need to understand a little bit about, like, how triggers work, and like a little bit of logic around system design, but it's really not code. It's just kind of thinking through, what do I need the process to be, and what action do I want to happen. And some of them are like a little bit easier to use than others. Like Salesforce can be pretty complicated, but Zoho is like pretty straightforward. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so
Hey, Derek,
go ahead.
Real quick, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
I see a few questions coming through in the chat. If you can please post your questions in the Q&A so we can properly address them, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, I just posted a link in the chat function just for our 1-minute survey that we are asking you to please fill out for us. We so appreciate your feedback, and in order to continue these no-cost webinars, our funders, they actually require that we have you all fill that 1-minute survey out. So if you don't see it in the chat, just kind of scroll up a little bit. You'll see the link that I put in there for that survey. It'll also be sent to you in an email. And then I also wanted to let everyone know that the PowerPoints, along with other materials from this webinar, will be sent to you within 3 to 5 business days after the webinar. So yeah, that was all I wanted to say, Derek. And also, Derek, like, if you want me to read these questions off for you, I can do that as well.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the offer. I'm happy to kind of look through and pull them. I'll make sure to flip to the chat just in case people didn't kind of hear your comment about including in the Q&A. I didn't realize there were some questions in there. Yeah, so why don't we keep going? But again, yeah, really appreciate if you can fill out the survey at the end of this. I appreciate feedback, any feedback that you have for me, in ways that this can be more impactful and more valuable. Actually, kind of one of the questions was, does SBDC offer or have any like one-on-one trainings for these CRMs for those that don't have experience? I won't speak for DC, although Kiki, you can kind of jump in, but I do know that part of what we might be looking to do is they have like follow-up sessions that might be more of a series on some of these topics, right? So this was obviously very high level, just kind of introducing you to the concept, but maybe if we want some 101s for how you'd actually set something up, or actually configuring it on one of these tools, that's something that we can definitely look into, but I don't think anything is out there right now.
Hey, Derek, I'm gonna just hop in real quick to the Cecilia Global Group. I actually sent you an email. I believe we've been emailing back and forth. So if you want just some more information about that one-on-one beginners training, I'll send it to you in an email, or you can just respond back to the email that I sent you, okay? Sorry about that, Derek.
No, that's excellent. So we had a question from Apple Leaf saying, can these CRMs be integrated to an emailing app say constant contact? Yeah, so that's a great it's a great question, and this is where I started to include some of these definitely offer integrations. So I know for sure that Zoho and HubSpot do offer integrations into constant contact, or even might have some built-in email campaign management functionality as part of the CRM, but some of them do not, right? So I can't speak for all the ones that are at the bottom. I know Bittrex24 doesn't have direct integrations that you can connect it with constant contact. But what I will say too is you need to be kind of cognizant of, typically once you start to integrate it into these other systems, you might have to move from like a free version to a paid version. The integrations is usually something that they will kind of push you towards more of like a premium or paid version, and usually it's still pretty affordable, but it's just something to consider. But yeah, definitely like Salesforce for sure, and then something like Zoho and HubSpot would as well. Let's see, a few other questions. So Laura asked, what are the top 5 functions we should look for in a CRM? I would say you definitely, something that you'll see in every single one, they're very similar. You want a way of obviously tracking, your customer information in a way that's secure. And so you'll want a way of tracking your purchases or contacts, like, whether you've reached out to people or not before. And then you'll, ideally you want a way of building a process within the actual CRM. So in Salesforce, right, you can define what the sales process might be for something, and it's going to give you stages, and here's the information you want to collect at each stage. Not every CRM is going to do that, but it is particularly valuable, especially if you have a team of people where you want to kind of scale a process that's consistent. And then, I think those are the top 3 in terms of functionality, but really the biggest thing is going to be, it should be something that you think is easy to use and something that you don't have a hard time maintaining, right? I think where a lot of people, and myself included, get kind of wrapped up is that, I might pick a software that's like really powerful, really cool, has tons of functionality, but it's kind of complex, and it becomes more of a burden to maintain it and keep it kind of like everything flowing smoothly than it would be if it was a simpler application that kind of did fewer things, but just did them really well, right? So that's what I would challenge you to think about. I wouldn't look at, hey, what are all the features and all the stuff that it can do? It's more like, have I tried it out? Used a free trial? Do I think it'll be able to manage, my process for my business relatively pain-free? Because that's where the real value is if it can basically become automatic and second nature, then it's really valuable. Then Sean's question about whether or not, if Bittrex, Zoho, and HubSpot are my favorite free CRM platforms. To be honest, I haven't used Bittrex24 that much. I have used Zoho and HubSpot. Those are kind of like the gold standard, CRM platforms for things that aren't huge businesses, right? So I'd say Salesforce is probably, the biggest one, and probably not as applicable for small businesses. I think Zoho and HubSpot do a great job of kind of providing a full-fledged CRM solution, but something that's a bit more consumable and simple for small businesses. We're building a new website and want to pull our CRM details from Square and from MailChimp. So do we need an outside CRM program? So Amy, so you asked a question about building a website, connecting it to Square and MailChimp. So it really depends on, sometimes if all you're going to be doing is connecting through email newsletters, your like MailChimp might, it kind of has CRM stuff built into it, because it will track, hey, when have they, what emails have they received? What have they opened? Like it provides a CRM specific to email stuff. So you're welcome to just kind of run it off of that, but you'll be a little bit limited once you try and expand beyond, let's say, the functionalities of MailChimp. Like if for whatever reason you start doing calls and you start doing things that are a little bit more high touch, you might not have a place to track that. And so that's where connecting all of those things into a kind of a CRM might be valuable. But depending on where you're at your business right now, you might not need it, right? So you can kind of cross that bridge when you get there, and there's a real need to track information about your customers beyond like what's available in MailChimp and then in Square. So let's see. Are we allowed to keep customer data? so a few questions about I guess they're a little bit different, but about customer data and privacy. This is actually one thing I would include. Like, you'll want to choose a CRM platform that's pretty reputable and has a reputation for security and privacy. We've heard a lot of things about like data breaches and how kind of vulnerable it can leave some of us. So from a security perspective, I would rely on like really well-known products. And then I will say for customer data, the best way to do it is, obviously if simple stuff like, providing their name and their email and like contact information. If they provided it to you, then I think that's pretty much fair game to track. It's some of these other information that might be a little bit more sensitive that you'll definitely want to have consent from them in terms of how you track that information. So a really common way of doing that is actually establishing a loyalty program or a rewards program where they're kind of incentivized to provide some information about themselves, maybe their birthday or their, I guess the age you can get from their birthday, or like their phone number or something like that, kind of in exchange for, some loyalty program or some rewards program, right? Because maybe they get like a free latte or something on their birthday. So in that case, as long as it's clear that, they are kind of consenting to provide this information to you, then, I think it's fair, but you'll want to definitely kind of spend a little bit more time on that to make sure that you are kind of meeting the expectations of your customers' trust. So, rule of thumb for spamming prospective clients. Yeah, so yeah, I think it's a great question about like, where do you draw the line in terms of, pestering people, and what counts as actual customer acquisition, right? I think I probably, can't speak to what is the right line to draw for your business. Obviously, like different people and different businesses have, different strategies and approaches. Some places are incredibly persistent. They reach out, they might turn off customers that don't like being pestered, but they also might convert really highly on another group of customers that are kind of on the fence, right? So I think that really comes down to what you want your process to be. And it's a little bit of a judgment call based on who your customers are, how they've responded. And it's also helpful to, like, if you already have an existing customer group, to do something like surveys, right? Which is like, whenever we were engaging you, did we do it too much? Did we do it not enough? Were you expecting more from us? That's a way of getting some good feedback from folks that, probably have an opinion about, their experience with their business. And you can use that to kind of have a feedback loop for how you want to engage with future customers. Yeah. Are the CMS systems set up to send emails automatically on a certain date and time? So Laura, there's definitely some of the CRMs here have email functionality built in. So for example, Zoho has like these marketing stuff. And so they have an email campaign manager built right into the platform. I can't remember if it's included in the free version of it, but you can definitely set up like email campaigns. It'll send on a particular date and time to X group of users. Or what you can do is have something, a traditional CRM, and then connect it to something like a MailChimp or a Constant Contact, which is kind of purpose built for email, mailers. But some of them include it all in one. Sometimes you'll need to integrate, but it's definitely a capability. Top 3 recommendations for small business consulting group. I think the Small Business Development Center offers, they have consultants that basically answer questions like this and provide a lot more detail on a day-to-day basis. So I'd highly recommend them. For certain companies or certain nonprofits provide a little bit, even more like pro bono, like high touch, support in terms of like maybe you need help actually building a website. Some places will actually help you do that. Though I can't think of the ones off the top of my head. There's just the ones that I know from certain from other states, but there's definitely resources available out there that can help you as well. But I would probably start with the Small Business Development Center. Okay, so we've answered 19 questions. Pretty good. Any other questions that folks might might have, or any feedback in general that you have for me or Kiki. Hopefully this was valuable to you guys. Again, really appreciate if you fill out the survey at the end, and we might do, let us know if we should do more of these sessions or some follow-up sessions. So Kiki, is there anything else that you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
No, I think that's it. If you don't have anything else, and if no one has any other questions, we would just like to thank you for your participation today. Again, as Derek stated, please don't forget to fill out that 1-minute survey for us. Derek, thank you so much for doing another one of these CRM basic webinars for us. We really love to have you do these for us, and we truly appreciate your knowledge and everything that you share with us. If there are no other questions, I just thank you all. I wish you all a wonderful afternoon. Derek, would you like to share like your contact information or anything, just in case, like if someone had questions or if they wanted to address something with you specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Derek Gibbs. You can reach me at my work email. It's just derek.gibbs@pwc.com. I'm happy to chat or, provide any advice or any information that might be helpful to you guys. So yeah.
All right. Well, that ends our webinar for today. If you guys have any other further questions, feel free to shoot Temple SVDC at email as well. We can definitely get you connected with the consultant to have more in-depth conversations in regards to your CRM platforms. Our email address is sbdc@temple.edu. Again, that email address is sbdc@temple.edu. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.